I didn't cry when my son stole millions from me. No, not a single tear fell that day in the lawyer's office, even as he sat across from me with a grin wide enough to split his face, declaring I was worth nothing more than the years I spent raising him. I didn't break when they stripped me of the house I built with my own hands, or even when they claimed the piano that once carried every hymn, every lullaby, every song of love my husband left behind. The truth is I stayed silent. I held my breath. I told myself I could weather even this storm. But late one night as I passed by that house, my house, I heard it. The piano. The same one my husband used to play, the same one my daughter learned her first song on. And though no lights burned inside, though no hand should have touched those keys, music drifted out, slow and haunting, carrying the melody my husband wrote for me before he died. It was then not for millions, not for property, but for the sound of love breaking through death itself, that I finally cried. And before I tell you the whole story, let me ask you this. Have you ever been betrayed by your own family, the very blood you once sacrificed everything for? So share your story in the comments. Your voice matters. And if you're new here, don't forget to subscribe, because stories like mine are proof that betrayal cuts deepest where love once lived. I've carried many names in my 72 years, but these days I am simply Evelyn Hart, a widow in Savannah, Georgia. Some people still call me Miss Evelyn when I walk to church or pick up my groceries at the corner market. They say it with kindness, but I can feel the unspoken questions behind their eyes. Questions about what really happened with my family, about why my son won't speak to me, about why the big Hart estate now sits so cold and quiet, though once it rang with music and laughter. If you've lived long enough, you know this truth. A stranger's betrayal can wound you, but a child's betrayal can hollow you out. And I am a hollow woman who learned too late that love does not always protect you from greed. My husband, Richard, was a gentle man, the kind who believed more in songs than in riches. When he courted me, he didn't bring diamonds or pearls, he brought me a melody. He sat at that upright piano in his parents' parlor and played a tune he had written just for me. I laughed when he called it Evelyn's song, but he swore that if I ever doubted his love, all I had to do was listen to those notes. Years passed, and that piano became more than wood and strings. Became the center of our lives. We raised 2 children in that house. Michael, our firstborn, ambitious and sharp, and Lydia, quiet and soulful, always humming under her breath. The piano saw it all. Lydia's first recital, the hymns we played on Christmas Eve, even the lullabies I whispered when Richard worked long nights. To me, that piano was not furniture. It was a vessel of memory, a place where love left fingerprints you could still hear. But Michael, he never understood. To him, music was wasted time, something that didn't bring profit or prestige. From the time he was 16, he was already talking about law firms, stocks, and titles. I thought it was ambition. I didn't see the arrogance growing behind his smile. I didn't see the distance he was planting between himself and the family that had bled for him. When Richard fell ill, I spent sleepless nights caring for him, while Michael handled the important things, as he called them. Papers, accounts, meetings. He brushed me aside as though my role as wife and mother was too small to matter. When Richard finally passed, I thought grief would bring us together. Instead, it sharpened Michael's hunger. I remember the day of the will reading with a clarity that burns. We sat in a lawyer's office, a room so polished and cold it could have been carved from ice. Michael leaned back in his chair, smirking, while Lydia twisted her hands in her lap, eyes fixed on the floor. I waited, my breath steady, my hands folded just like I'd done through every storm of my life. And then the words came, Michael declaring that I was entitled to nothing. He said it so easily, like telling the weather. Mother already had her inheritance, he told the lawyer. She raised us. That was her share. Those words. If words could bruise flesh, I would have been black and blue that day. I didn't shout. I didn't plead. I simply nodded, though my chest felt hollow as a church bell after the service is over. Lydia never looked at me. She sat there, torn, caught in a silence that hurt worse than any insult. I walked out of that office stripped not only of my husband's estate, but of dignity itself. The house was gone. The accounts were gone. And worst of all, even the piano was taken from me, the very heart of our family. I moved into a small rented room downtown, one of those old buildings where the paint flakes off the windowsills and the floors creak with every step. People think widows cry endlessly, but I didn't. Not then. My eyes stayed dry. My heart felt like stone. It wasn't until that night, when I passed the old house and heard the piano, that the tears finally came. It was past midnight, the street lamps casting their dim orange glow across the pavement. I had walked that road 100 times before, but something pulled me that evening. Maybe it was habit, maybe it was grief, maybe it was Richard himself. I slowed as I reached the gate of our house, and that's when I heard it. Music. Faint, drifting, but unmistakable. The piano. And not just any tune. No, it was Evelyn's song. The melody Richard had written for me all those years ago, the one he promised would always remind me of his love. I froze. The house was dark, empty. No car in the driveway. No lights in the windows. No reason, human or otherwise, for that piano to be playing. And yet, note after note floated out into the night air, soft as breath, sure as heartbeat. I stood there until my knees buckled, my hands trembling against the cold iron gate. And then, for the first time since the betrayal, tears poured down my face. Not for the millions my son had stolen. Not for the house I had lost. But for that music. Proof that love lingers even when flesh has returned to dust. That night I knew the story was not over. Before betrayal entered my home like a shadow, life was not perfect, but it was ours. When I think back now, it almost feels like a dream stitched together with the hum of that piano. Richard and I built our family from little more than faith and long hours. I worked as a seamstress in Savannah, fingers pricked raw from needles, while Richard spent his days at the docks, hauling crates and bargaining for every cent. We didn't have much money, but we had a kind of richness that cannot be counted in dollars. Evenings were sacred. Richard would sit at the piano and I would hum along, Lydia curled up on the rug at our feet, her eyes heavy with sleep. Michael, even as a boy, would sit apart, books spread across his lap, already chasing the thought of a life bigger than ours. I thought he would grow out of it. Most boys dream of castles they cannot build. But Michael's dreams grew harder, sharper. He wanted more than music, more than warmth. He wanted power. Still, I told myself love would be enough. I told myself that raising him with kindness would tether him to the values we held. That was my mistake, thinking love alone could cure greed. I remember the first time Richard noticed it. Michael was about 16, already wearing his ambition like armor. Richard had asked him to sit with us while Lydia played a hymn she'd been practicing for church. Michael sighed, rolled his eyes, and said, "What good is any of this? Music doesn't put food on the table. It's a waste of time." The room went still. Lydia's hands faltered on the keys. Richard didn't raise his voice, he rarely did. But his eyes burned, and he told Michael something I will never forget. "Son, the table may feed your body, but this piano, it feeds your soul. One day when the world leaves you cold, you'll understand." Michael only scoffed. He never touched the piano again. Years rolled on and I poured everything I had into those children. I stitched late into the night to afford Michael's books, tuition, and polished shoes for his law studies. My back ached, my eyes strained, but I kept going because that's what mothers do. Lydia, sweet girl, never asked for much. She was content with second-hand dresses and old hymnals. All she wanted was time at the piano with her father. Sometimes I think the piano gave her more of him than even I had. She absorbed his gentleness, his patience, his way of letting the world be heavy but never letting it crush him. Me. I was the thread that bound us. I managed the house, cooked meals, patched holes in both clothing and hearts. Our life was not grand, but it was steady, like the rhythm of a hymn sung every Sunday. But beneath that steadiness, cracks were forming. Michael grew more distant. Each visit home from university, he carried himself with more arrogance. He looked at the house as if it were a cage, at the piano as if it were a foolish indulgence. He rarely spoke to Lydia, except to dismiss her music as childish. And with me he was polite but cold, like a man shaking hands with a stranger. I tried to ignore it. Mothers always hope. I thought perhaps when he married or when he had children of his own, he would soften. Perhaps he would understand the sacrifices we made. Perhaps he would finally sit beside the piano and let a single note move him. But greed does not soften. It grows. When Richard fell ill, the weight of those years came crashing down. I was at his bedside every moment, sponging his fevered brow, whispering prayers, while Michael buried himself in papers and numbers. He said he was handling things. He said it like a badge of honor, but in truth, it was the beginning of the theft. Richard, even in sickness, worried about the piano. He would reach for my hand and whisper, "Promise me, Evelyn, that you'll keep it safe. That Lydia will always have it. That even when I'm gone, my song will stay alive." I promised him, though I didn't know how heavy that promise would become. Lydia, in those days, played softly in the next room while I cared for him. The music drifted through the walls, filling the silence between Richard's shallow breaths. It was as though the piano itself was holding vigil, a second heartbeat in the house. I could not imagine then that this very instrument, the soul of our family, would one day become the center of betrayal. Looking back, I see the signs. Michael's sharp words, his cold glances, the way he carried himself as though the family was already a burden he could not wait to cast off. But love makes us blind. I told myself that no matter how far he drifted, blood would call him home. I was wrong. The piano stood as both witness and prophet. In its keys were echoes of laughter, tears, prayers. And in those same keys, waiting in silence, was the storm that would one day break my family apart. The day of the will reading is carved into my memory the way lightning carves scars across the night sky. I knew it would be painful, but I never expected the cruelty that unfolded in that polished office. The building itself was tall and narrow, its brick walls weathered like old skin, sitting on one of Savannah's busier streets. Inside, the air smelled of lemon polish and old paper. The lawyer's office was lined with shelves of thick books, their spines gleaming gold, a silent reminder of the weight of words. I sat in the wooden chair across from his desk, my hands folded neatly in my lap. It's a habit of mine, folding my hands whenever I feel the storm rising, as though stillness can keep me from breaking. Michael was already there when I walked in, lounging back in his chair as if he owned the place. He wore a suit so sharp it could have cut glass, his cufflinks glinting each time he shifted his hands. He looked at me with that same smirk I'd seen too many times before, the smirk of a man who believed he had already won. Lydia sat off to the side, her posture tight, her eyes downcast. She didn't look at me. She didn't look at her brother. She just kept twisting her fingers in her lap, like she was holding on to invisible threads. The lawyer, Mr. Daniels, cleared his throat, his glasses sliding down his nose. "Thank you all for coming," he began. "As you know, your late husband left specific instructions regarding his estate. It is my duty to read them aloud." My heart tightened in my chest. Richard's voice had not left my ears since he died, but hearing his words on paper, it was like inviting his ghost into the room. But before Mr. Daniels could continue, Michael leaned forward, his smirk widening. "Let's make this simple, shall we?" His tone was casual, almost mocking. "We all know how this is going to go. Lydia and I have already discussed it." I looked at Lydia, but she didn't meet my eyes. My stomach dropped. Michael went on. "Mother, you don't need to concern yourself. You've already had your share. You raised us. That was your inheritance. Dad left the real estate and the business holdings to me. Lydia gets the smaller accounts. That's fair, don't you think?" The words hit me like stones. I'm forgiving. My ears rang, and for a moment I thought I might faint. I turned to Lydia again, desperate for her to speak, to defend me. But she only bit her lip and lowered her gaze further, as if the floor might open and swallow her whole. I whispered, barely able to breathe. Michael, is this what your father wanted? Michael chuckled under his breath, a sound so sharp it felt like broken glass. Father wanted what was best for the family. And I'm the one capable of handling it. He gestured at me with a dismissive flick of his hand. You've done enough. You don't need the burden of money or property. Leave it to those of us who know what to do with it. His arrogance filled the room, suffocating me. Mr. Daniels adjusted his papers, clearly uneasy, but Michael pressed on before the lawyer could intervene. The house is mine, Mother. The accounts are mine. Even the piano. It'll be sold if I decide it should be. You don't have to worry about it anymore. The piano. My breath caught. He said it so easily, like it was nothing more than a piece of furniture. That piano was where Richard's soul still lingered, where Lydia's laughter had grown into music, where every hymn and lullaby of our family had been born. To hear my son speak of selling it, it was like he was tearing Richard's memory from my hands. And in that instant I felt something else. The air in the room shifted just slightly. A draft moved across my cheek, though no window was open. The faintest sound, like a key being pressed on a piano, rang in my ears. No one else seemed to hear it. Only me. Was it my imagination? Grief playing tricks? Or was Richard reminding me he was still near, still watching as his son betrayed the woman who had stood by his side? I didn't answer Michael. My voice would not come. I only sat still, folding my hands tighter in my lap. My silence was the only shield I had left. But inside me something cracked. When the meeting ended, Michael rose quickly, buttoning his jacket, striding out as though the estate were already in his pocket. Lydia lingered for a moment, her lips trembling, her eyes flicking toward me, but she said nothing. Not one word. And so I walked out alone, my footsteps echoing against the marble floor, the sound hollow, like a church emptied after a funeral. That day I lost more than money. I lost the house, the accounts, the piano, but most of all I lost my son. Betrayal is not loud. It doesn't shout. It slips in with quiet certainty, and by the time you realize it has arrived, everything you loved has already been taken. After that day in the lawyer's office, I walked through Savannah as though the city no longer belonged to me. The cobblestone streets, the moss-draped oaks, the smell of salt drifting from the river. Once they had been familiar comforts. Now they mocked me. I felt like a stranger in my own life. I moved into a small room above a laundromat on the south side of town. The walls were yellowed with age, the pipes rattled at night, and the floor slanted just enough that my chair wobbled when I sat to eat. The landlady meant well, but even her kindness felt like pity. I had gone from being Mrs. Hart of the big house on Whitaker Street to the old widow upstairs. Money was scarce. The accounts were gone. The house was gone. And the one possession I longed for most, the piano, was locked away behind gates I no longer had a key to. But worse than poverty was the silence. Richard was gone. Michael had cut me out. Lydia, though she tried, stayed quiet, caught in the net her brother had cast. Days passed in stillness. Nights were worse. I would lie in bed, staring at the cracked ceiling, listening to the pipes moan and the city hum beyond the window. And in that silence my mind replayed Michael's words. You've already had your share. If words could kill, those would have buried me. I told myself not to cry. I told myself I had endured worse. Childhood hunger, years of hard work, the pain of losing my husband. But betrayal by your own son is not like other wounds. It doesn't heal. It festers. And then came the night when silence broke. It was late, past midnight. The laundromat downstairs had gone dark, and the only sound was the faint buzz of the street lamps outside. I couldn't sleep, so I put on my shawl and walked. Sometimes, when the walls closed in too tightly, I let the night air cool my mind. My feet carried me without thought, and soon I stood at the corner of Whitaker Street. Our street, the street where the Hart house loomed. The house looked the same from the outside. Tall windows, white columns, ivy curling across the porch. But to me it was unrecognizable. It no longer belonged to me, no longer held my place at the table. It was Michael's now, cold, claimed, but empty. Then I heard it. Music. Soft, faint, but unmistakable. The piano. At first I thought it was a trick of memory, that my longing had conjured sound from silence. But no, each note was clear. The melody drifted through the open upstairs window, sweet and slow, wrapping around me like a voice carried on the wind. It was our song. The one Richard had written when he courted me. The one he played on the night he asked me to marry him. The one we danced to in the parlor after the children had gone to bed. My knees nearly gave way. I clutched the iron gate, the cold biting into my skin, my breath caught between disbelief and sorrow. The house was dark. No lights glowed in the windows. No car sat in the driveway. No living soul should have been there. And yet the piano played. For a moment, I wondered if Lydia had returned, sneaking in to keep her father's memory alive. But the longer I listened, the more I knew. This was not Lydia's touch. This was something older, something deeper. The melody was too exact, too full of Richard's soul. It was him. Somehow it was him. Tears spilled down my cheeks, hot and unrelenting. I did not cry for the money. I did not cry for the house. I cried because love had found a way back to me even through death. And then, just as suddenly as it began, the music stopped. The silence that followed was heavier than any sound I had ever known. My heart pounded, my hands trembling against the gate. I wanted to run forward, to fling open the door, to touch the keys and know for certain. But I couldn't. Fear and awe held me frozen in place. The night air whispered through the trees, carrying the faint scent of jasmine. It felt like Richard's presence lingered in the air, watching me, urging me not to give up. I staggered back to my little room above the laundromat, my shawl clutched tightly around me. Sleep did not come. Instead, I sat by the window, staring out at the street, waiting for dawn, replaying the sound of the piano again and again in my mind. By morning, I knew one thing. Something was hidden in that house, something Richard wanted me to find. And for the first time since the betrayal, I felt not only grief, but resolve. The night I heard the piano playing by itself, I knew my story wasn't finished. I couldn't prove it to anyone, and I didn't dare tell Michael. He would only laugh, call me senile, and twist the knife deeper. But in my heart, I knew Richard was reaching for me through those keys. He had left me something. And whatever it was, he wanted me to find it. For several days I walked past the old house at night, listening. Sometimes the air was still, the windows dark, no sound escaping. Other nights I caught the faintest hum, like a single note pressed and held, hanging in the air until it vanished. Whether it was real or born of grief I cannot say. But it pulled at me, stronger each time, until I could no longer ignore it. It was Lydia who finally gave me the chance. She came to see me one afternoon, her face pale and drawn, her hands clutching one another as though they might slip away if she let go. "Mother," she whispered, "I've been back to the house." My heart lurched. "You've been there?" She nodded, eyes shining with unshed tears. I couldn't stay away. I needed to touch the piano. When I played it, it felt like Father was sitting beside me. "But Mother," she leaned closer, her voice trembling. "Sometimes when I arrived it was already playing. I felt the breath leave my lungs. My daughter had heard it too. I wasn't losing my mind." Lydia gripped my hand. "I think Father wants us to find something. He wouldn't let that piano sing for no reason." The very next evening, when the streets had quieted and the world seemed to hold its breath, Lydia slipped me into the house. My hands shook as I crossed the threshold. The air inside was cool, heavy with dust, yet the moment I entered the parlor, it felt alive, charged, as though unseen eyes were watching. The piano sat waiting. Its wood gleamed faintly in the dim light, though no one had polished it since I left. My knees weakened, but I forced myself forward, my hand brushing across the lid. The silence was thick, yet beneath it I swore I felt a hum, a vibration that belonged not to the living world. "Mother," Lydia whispered, "sit." Together we lowered ourselves onto the bench. My fingers hovered above the keys, trembling. I hadn't played since Richard died. Slowly I pressed one note. The sound rang out, low and solemn, filling the room like a voice speaking after a long silence. Lydia added another, and together we built the melody. Evelyn's song. The one Richard had given me, the one I heard that night at the gate. And as we played, something stirred. Lydia's foot brushed against the piano bench, knocking it slightly askew. A hollow clatter echoed beneath the cushion. We froze. Slowly I lifted the worn fabric seat. Inside, hidden beneath old sheet music, lay a thick envelope. My hands shook as I pulled it out. The paper was yellowed at the edges, but Richard's handwriting was clear. With trembling fingers I tore it open. Inside were documents, legal binding, deeds, amendments, signatures. Proof that Richard had left the house and the piano, jointly in my name. Michael could not sell it, could not touch it without my consent. Richard had tied me to this house, anchored me to the very heart of our family. I pressed the papers to my chest, and in that moment, I swore I felt Richard's warmth against my skin. Tears spilled freely down my cheeks. "You didn't forget me," I whispered. "You never forgot." Lydia was crying too. "Mother, he left it for you. He made sure." I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. And then, it happened. The piano played. Just 3 notes. Soft, slow, unmistakable. Neither of us had touched the keys. Lydia gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. I sat frozen, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might break free from my chest. But the fear was brief. What I felt instead was peace. Richard's peace. His way of telling us that he was still here, that his love had not died with his body. For a long moment we sat in silence, clutching one another, staring at the instrument that had become both a relic and a messenger. That night I carried the documents back to my small rented room. I hid them carefully, away from Michael's reach. For the first time since his betrayal, I slept soundly. I had been stripped of dignity, cast aside, humiliated. But Richard had left me not only proof of my worth, but a weapon Michael could not see coming. And in the stillness of that night I heard it again, faint, distant, but sure. The piano. 3 notes like a promise. The storm was far from over. But now I had thunder of my own. Secrets are heavy things, but some are worth carrying. The night I found Richard's envelope, I felt as though the piano itself had armed me with a shield. Michael thought me powerless, stripped bare, left to wither. But in truth I held the one key that could undo him. I did not rush to reveal it. Oh, I waited. Patience is something age teaches you and grief sharpens it. I folded the papers neatly, sealed them inside a box beneath my bed, and I kept silent. Meanwhile, Michael's world began to tremble. Word spread quickly through Savannah. Michael Hart, the brilliant young lawyer, had made bold investments. Too bold. He bought into ventures that promised great wealth but were nothing more than sandcastles against the tide. At first he walked tall, dismissing whispers of trouble. But little by little the cracks appeared. Clients pulled away. Banks called in loans. The glow of his success dimmed. I heard it all from neighbors, from the women in the market, from Lydia, who came to me in tears. She had seen him, pale and frantic, pacing his office late into the night, snapping at his staff, drinking more than he should. His arrogance, once a crown, had begun to strangle him. And still he held to the house like a drowning man clutching driftwood. He told Lydia that selling it would solve everything. The debts, the lawsuits, the whispers. He spoke of tearing down the parlor, gutting the place, modernizing it. He even mocked the piano, calling it an old relic gathering dust. When Lydia told me this, her voice cracked. "Mother, he means to get rid of it. He wants to erase everything Father left behind." I placed my hand over hers. "He can't," I whispered. "Not while I live." She looked at me, confused, but I didn't reveal my secret. Not yet. At night, the piano reminded me of my waiting power. Sometimes I heard it faintly, 3 notes like a heartbeat in the dark. Other nights, a single chord that hung in the air, low and heavy. I would sit by the window of my small room, shawl wrapped around my shoulders, and whisper into the night, "I hear you, Richard. I know. I will protect it." The strange thing was, those nights didn't frighten me anymore. What might have once seemed like a haunting felt instead like a vow. The piano wasn't just an instrument. It was Richard's voice, guiding me, reminding me that justice, though slow, would come. Michael's desperation grew louder with each passing week. He cornered Lydia, pressing her to sign papers. "If we sell, we survive," he told her. "If we don't, we drown." Lydia resisted, weakly at first, but then with a strength I hadn't seen in her before. Perhaps the piano spoke to her as well. She refused to sign, refused to betray her father's memory. Michael raged, calling her naive, foolish, ungrateful. He reminded her of the money he had given her, the roof he provided. He tried to make her feel small. But Lydia held her ground. And I, though silent, was the anchor behind her. I remember one evening she came to me shaken after another argument. We sat together in my little room, the kettle steaming between us. "Mother," she said, "he's changing. It's like greed has hollowed him out. He doesn't see us anymore. He doesn't even see Father. All he sees are dollar signs." I nodded slowly. "Greed blinds, child. It makes a man see the world not as it is, but as he wants to own it. And when the world won't bend, it crushes him instead." She reached for my hand, and for the first time I saw her eyes burn with resolve. "We can't let him win. Father wouldn't forgive us if we did." The days blurred, but pressure mounted. Michael's debts grew, and whispers followed him wherever he went. He looked thinner, his skin pale, his smirk gone. Yet he still clung to the house, still threatened to tear it apart. And through it all I kept silent, waiting, knowing the moment would come. Then one night the piano spoke louder than ever before. It was late, the moon high, the air heavy with summer heat. I woke to the sound of music, clear, strong, impossible to deny. The melody filled the night, each note pouring through my window though I was miles from the house. Lydia came running to me, breathless, tears streaking her cheeks. "Mother," she gasped, "it's playing again, louder than ever." I heard it all the way down the street. We stood together by the window listening. And for a brief moment, it was as if Richard himself had returned, his fingers dancing across the keys, urging us to hold steady. I pressed Lydia's hand. "The time is near," I whispered. "He cannot silence us. Not this time." The piano's last note hung in the air, deep and unshakable like a warning bell. And in my heart I knew, the storm Michael had built with his greed was about to break. And when it did, I would be ready. The storm broke on a sweltering August afternoon. Michael had summoned us to the house, his house he called it, though even in my silence I knew better. The parlor smelled of dust and old wood, the air heavy as though the walls themselves had been holding their breath. He stood tall, though his suit hung looser than before, his eyes shadowed from sleepless nights. Lydia sat near me, her hands folded tightly, her knuckles pale. I could feel her trembling through the air between us. Michael slapped a stack of papers onto the table. "It's simple," he said, his voice hard. "We sell the house. The land is worth millions. It clears the debts, saves my reputation, and sets us free from this burden." "Burden," I repeated softly, the word tasting bitter. How could he call the home his father built, the piano that carried our lives, a burden? "Yes, a burden," Michael snapped. His eyes flicked toward the piano, sitting silent in the corner, its dark wood gleaming faintly. "That thing especially. A relic. I should have it hauled out and burned." Lydia gasped. My heart clenched. But before I could speak, something happened. A sound. A single note. Resonant. The piano had spoken. Michael froze, his eyes narrowing. "Did you?" He looked at us, then back to the keys. No one had touched them. Yet the note lingered in the room, vibrating through the floorboards, through my bones. I straightened my shoulders, my breath steady. "Michael," I said quietly, "your father does not agree with you." He scoffed, trying to hide the flicker of fear in his eyes. "Don't start with your stories, Mother. Enough sentimentality. We need money, not music." And that's when I reached into my bag. I laid the envelope on the table, the papers Richard had left behind, the proof he had tied the house and the piano to me. Michael's face drained of color. "What is this?" His voice cracked as he snatched up the documents, his eyes scanning the signatures, the seals. His hands trembled. "No. This can't be valid." "It is," I said, my voice calm but strong. "Your father made certain of it. You cannot sell the house without my consent. And the piano stays where it is." Lydia leaned forward, her voice shaking but firm. "Father wanted it for us, Michael. Not for your debts. Not for your greed." He slammed the papers down, his face twisted in rage. "You think this changes anything? You think you can stand in my way? I am the heir, not you. He pointed at me, his finger trembling with fury. "You're just an old woman clinging to ghosts." And then, as if to answer him, the piano played again. Not one note this time, but three. Clear, rising, echoing. Lydia covered her mouth with her hands. My eyes filled with tears, but I did not look away. I stared into Michael's furious face and whispered, "I am not clinging to ghosts. I am keeping a promise." The room fell silent, except for the faint vibration of the notes still hanging in the air. Michael staggered back, his chest heaving. For the first time, his arrogance cracked. He looked less like the triumphant heir and more like a lost boy, cornered by forces he could not control. "You can't do this to me," he hissed. "Do you know what I've risked? Do you know what I've built? Without this house, I'm ruined." I stood slowly, my hand resting on the edge of the table. "You ruined yourself, Michael. Not me. Not your father. Not this house. You." His lips curled, his voice rising into a shout. "You're nothing without me. You'd be in the gutter if not for me." But even as his voice thundered, the piano answered again, one deep, defiant chord filling the air like a final verdict. Michael's eyes widened, his face pale as bone. He stumbled toward the door, his words unraveling into curses and denial. Lydia rose, her tears falling freely now, and for the first time she moved to my side instead of his. "Mother," she whispered, clutching my arm, "he can't hurt us anymore." I pressed her hand gently. "Not while your father still watches." Michael fled the room, slamming the door so hard the windows rattled. The house trembled with his fury, but the piano remained calm, silent now, as if its work was done. Lydia and I stood there in the parlor, the weight of what had just happened pressing down on us. My heart was heavy but not broken. For the first time since Richard's death, I felt that justice had not abandoned me. The papers lay on the table, proof of my right, proof of Richard's love. And though my son's betrayal had cut deep, the house, the piano, was mine still. The storm had shifted. And in the stillness that followed, I whispered to the air, "Thank you, Richard. You kept your promise." After Michael stormed out of the parlor, the silence he left behind was jagged. Lydia and I stood motionless, the papers still spread across the table, the piano looming in the corner like a sentinel. My hands trembled, though not from fear, no, from release. For months I had carried the weight of silence, and now the truth had finally come to light. But storms do not end with the first strike of lightning. They rumble on, breaking branches and flooding roads before they fade. And so it was with Michael. The very next day he returned. His footsteps thundered through the house, his voice echoing against the walls. "Mother, Lydia, you think you've won, but you haven't." Lydia clutched my arm as we stood in the hallway. I could see the strain in her eyes, the hurt of years spent bending to her brother's will. But something had changed in her since the night the piano played for us both. She no longer looked like a frightened child. She looked like a woman carrying her father's strength. Michael stormed into the parlor, his face red, his hands shaking. "You think a stack of papers will stop me? Do you think Father's ghost can stand in my way?" He spat the word ghost as if mocking us, but his eyes flickered toward the piano all the same. He could not quite hide his unease. "Michael," I said softly, "this house is not yours to destroy. The piano is not yours to silence. Your father made sure of that." He sneered. "Father was weak. He lived in songs and dreams while I built something real. Do you think the world cares about a tune? No. Cares about power, money, reputation. Things I fought for while you sat and played." Lydia stepped forward then, her voice steady. "You didn't build, Michael. You devoured. You took everything you could from everyone you could and called it strength. But it was greed. And greed doesn't build, it burns." Michael's head snapped toward her, his eyes narrowing. "And you," he hissed, "you've always been the useless one. Hiding behind hymns and lullabies while I carried the family." Lydia's chin lifted. "You didn't carry us. You crushed us. You tried to erase Father. You tried to erase Mother. But you won't succeed." For a moment the house seemed to shudder with their words. The air grew thick, the silence vibrating. And then, as if to mark the moment, the piano answered. A sharp chord rang out, loud, sudden, undeniable. None of us had touched the keys. Michael flinched. His bravado faltered. He spun toward the instrument, his face pale, his voice cracking. "Stop it," he shouted as though the wood and strings could hear him. "Stop this madness." But the piano did not stop. Another note struck, deep and resonant, filling the air with a sound that felt less like music and more like judgment. Tears pricked my eyes, but I did not look away. I stepped forward, my voice calm, firm. "Michael, betrayal is not measured in money. It's measured in trust. And you broke it. Not just mine, but your father's, your sister's, your own." He turned on me then, rage twisting his features. "I did what I had to do. Without me, you'd have nothing." I shook my head slowly. "Without you, Michael, I would still have peace. Without you, I would still have love. But with you, I have only loss. That is your doing. Not your father's. Not mine. Yours." The piano struck once more, soft this time, almost mournful. Michael staggered back, his chest heaving. For a moment I thought he might crumble, that he might fall to his knees and weep. But pride is a cruel master. Instead he shouted, "You'll regret this," before storming out again, his fury echoing down the hall. The door slammed and the house fell silent. Lydia collapsed against me, her tears soaking my shoulder. "Mother, it's over, isn't it?" I stroked her hair gently. "No, child. It has only begun. But he no longer holds the power. That much is over." We sat together at the piano then, side by side. My hands rested on the keys, hers trembling beside mine. Slowly together we began to play. The melody rose, Evelyn's song. The tune Richard had left us, the one that had carried me through love, loss, and betrayal. And as the notes filled the parlor, I swore I felt him there. Not as a ghost meant to frighten, but as a presence meant to guide. The music wrapped around us, a balm for wounds too deep for words. For the first time in months, I felt peace brush against my heart. Fragile, tentative, but real. The storm was not done, but I was no longer afraid of the thunder. In the days that followed Michael's outburst, the house grew quieter. Not empty, but calmer, as though it had exhaled a breath it had been holding for too long. Lydia and I stayed close, often sitting together in the parlor where sunlight streamed through the tall windows and the piano stood, silent but alive. Michael did not return. We heard of him, of course. Savannah is a city that carries gossip like wind carries pollen. People spoke of his debts, his frantic attempts to keep his name untarnished, the way his law partners began to step away from him one by one. The very empire he had tried to build was crumbling under his own hands. and there was nothing left for him to take from us. For me, the absence of his shadow was a kind of freedom. The weight I had carried since Richard's passing began to ease little by little. At night, I no longer lay awake with grief pressing on my chest. Instead, I listened for the faint hum of the piano, and sometimes when the air was still enough I heard it, a soft note or the faint echo of Richard's melody. It no longer frightened me, comforted me. Lydia began visiting more often, her laughter slowly returning. She confessed to me one evening while we brewed tea in the kitchen that she had felt torn for years, trapped between loyalty to her brother and love for her mother. "But now," she said, her voice trembling with relief, "I feel like I can breathe again." We sat together at the table, the kettle steaming between us, and I reached across to take her hand. "You never had to choose between us, child. Michael chose to walk his path, and now he must live with it. But you still carry your father's light." She smiled through her tears. "I think I hear him sometimes, Mother. When I play. It's like he's beside me, guiding my fingers." I nodded, my own eyes wet. "He is. He always will be." That evening we moved to the parlor and opened the piano. Lydia's hands trembled as she began, her fingers pressing softly against the keys. I joined her, our melody rising together, weaving memory with the present. The notes filled the air, rich and full, and as we played I felt something I hadn't felt in months: hope. The supernatural presence of the piano no longer felt like a warning. It felt like a bridge. Each note reminded me that though Richard's body was gone, his love was not. The house was no longer a battlefield. It was becoming a sanctuary again. Neighbors noticed the change too. Miss Harris from down the street brought over a pie and said, "It does my heart good to hear music from this house again. For so long it's been nothing but whispers of trouble." I only smiled, not telling her the whole truth, but grateful nonetheless. Michael's name, meanwhile, carried less weight with each passing week. His absence grew longer, his letters fewer, his voice never heard in this house again. Part of me mourned that. He was my son after all, flesh of my flesh. A mother's heart never stops aching for a child, no matter the wound. But another part of me understood something painful yet necessary. Sometimes, you must let the broken pieces fall away to save what still holds. The piano became our anchor. Lydia and I played it often, not just Evelyn's song but hymns, lullabies, even new melodies we created together. Each time I felt closer to her, as though we were stitching the torn fabric of our family with sound. One evening, as twilight fell and the cicadas hummed outside, Lydia asked softly, "Mother, do you think Michael will ever come back? Not for the house. Not for money. But for us." I looked at her, my chest heavy with both sorrow and wisdom. "If he does, it will not be soon. Greed takes a long time to loosen its grip. But if the day comes, we will be here. Not waiting but living. That is the difference." She nodded, tears brimming in her eyes, and then she placed her hands on the keys. Together we played once more. And in that music I felt Richard's smile. The resolution had begun, not in Michael's return but in our healing. Not in reclaiming wealth but in reclaiming peace. The house was still ours. The piano was still ours. And most importantly, the bond between mother and daughter, once silenced by betrayal, was alive again. The storm had not destroyed us. It had only carved away the false to reveal what truly mattered. And so, with each note, we stitched our lives back together, knowing that while Michael drifted further into the shadows of his own making, we were stepping into the light of memory, love, and dignity. When I sit at the piano now, my hands are slower, the bones stiff, the joints aching from years of work. But when my fingers press against the keys, all that pain melts away. Music does not care about age. It welcomes you back every time, like an old friend waiting patiently on the porch. Lydia often joins me. Some evenings we play until the candles burn low, the sound drifting out into the savannah night. Neighbors pause as they walk past, their footsteps slowing, their heads tilting toward the house that once carried only whispers of betrayal. Now it carries songs again. Michael has not returned. Word reaches us now and then, He struggles still, debts piling, his pride keeping him from facing the ruin he created. I grieve for him quietly in the way only a mother can. But I no longer let that grief hollow me. A wound cannot be the whole of a person, or it will swallow what is left. Instead, I choose peace. The house is mine not because of wealth or papers, but because Richard tied it to me with love. The piano is mine not because the law says so, but because it has always been the soul of this family. When I sit before it, I feel him there. Sometimes faintly, sometimes with a presence so near I can almost hear his breath. The notes remind me that death does not silence love. It only changes its voice. One night not long ago, Lydia and I played Evelyn's song together. When we finished, the room went still. And then softly 3 notes sounded on their own. We froze, our eyes wide, tears slipping down our cheeks. But neither of us was afraid. We knew Richard was with us still. I smiled through my tears, whispering, "We hear you, my love." In that moment I realized something. I had spent months thinking I lost everything: house, money, dignity. But what I truly feared losing was memory, the proof that love had lived here. And I never lost it. Not once. The piano carried it. Lydia carried it. I carried it. So I did not cry for millions. I cried because music carried me through grief and betrayal, because it reminded me that family is not measured in bank accounts but in the echoes we leave behind. I tell you this because I want you to know, even in betrayal, even in loss, you can choose what remains. You can guard the treasures that money cannot touch. For me, it was the piano. For you, it may be something else. A story, a photograph, a prayer whispered before dawn. Whatever it is, hold it. Protect it. It will outlast the storms. And to Michael, if he should ever hear these words, I will say only this. I pray the day comes when your pride finally breaks, and you remember the sound of your father's hands on these keys. If that day comes, this door will be open. Not for money, not for inheritance, but for forgiveness. Until then, Lydia and I will play. We will fill this house with songs. We will let the neighbors hear, let the city hear, let the heavens themselves hear that love was not silenced here. Because in the end, betrayal did not win. Love did. Thank you for listening to my story. If you've ever faced betrayal in your own family, I hope you know, you are not alone. Share your story in the comments. Your voice matters. And don't forget to subscribe, because sometimes the only way to heal is to speak and sometimes to listen.